All right. Good afternoon. I'll call the Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee to order for Tuesday, January 25th, 2022 at 1:05 p.m. First item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes. I think we have the 7th and 20th prepared in draft form at this point. Any questions or comments on either?
Okay, so are the 7th are the ones that just came in?
Yes. So have you had a chance to look at those or no?
I just got them,
Okay.
but I can probably just skim them right now. Let me just look.
It's pretty brief. That was our little working group meeting.
Yeah.
It was a 25-minute meeting.
Yeah, and you weren't even, that was the one that you were not at, Katura.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that looks fine to me. And I read the 20th one, so those looked great too. So.
Okay. And then Kathy, I'm just gonna, as long as you're okay with it, I'm just gonna add roll call vote, my favorite.
I know. Sorry, Jason. I want to make sure you always can do that, so I leave it off on purpose.
Okay. So then I'm gonna move to accept the meeting minutes for January 7th, 2022 and January 20th, 2022. There's
Second. I'll second that.
Okay, second by Katura. Any further discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. So that is unanimous. I'll go to number 4 because while we wait for Greg, chair's update. So Katura, I know you were there and participated. Kathy, I know you were going to watch the replay and look through the slides, but obviously the presentation of the town space needs study occurred last week. We have started to get some feedback in terms of finalizing that, but I think obviously we cautioned it was a proof of concept, and as Katura articulated very well, it's obviously predicated on action related to NERI and obviously just overall broader action from a school committee perspective. So I don't know, Katura, if you had anything else you wanted to discuss there, or any other comments that are relevant to this subcommittee?
No, just that, I mean, if I'm assuming Kathy saw it or will see it, but I thought it was a great presentation. I like the way they went over all the different scenarios. And I do think that the question that we got from my fellow school committee member is sort of symbolic of a lot of the questions we'll probably get at this point going forward. So I have a couple of thoughts on the presentation that the draft presentation that we're talking about today. But yeah, I thought it was good and made sense to me.
So I have not seen the meeting nor looked at the presentation. I've had quite a week. Katura, what did your school committee fellow members say?
Well, I think it's sort of the whole presentation on Thursday was from the town perspective, and the conclusion was Woodward would be great for the town, and the town, should take over Woodward and use it for all these various purposes, and sort of also with the broader plan of how to use the library and what to do with the overflow and all of that. And the question was, what are we going to do with the students? Basically, like, what's the plan for the schools and how is this going to affect the schools? And so my explanation was just that obviously this is sort of a two-pronged approach where we're looking at, sort of the town side of looking at, space needs and what would work well for all the departments in the town, as well as, our side of the school side of things is going to be to look at what makes sense for the school buildings and how to situate the students and what are we going to do with NERI and all of that. And so it's and I mentioned that we're going to be doing a fuller presentation from the school side on at our next meeting. So I think that will, and I think the presentation will obviously go a long way toward helping that.
Okay.
And I think it was a great comment. And I think there's no perfect ordering to how we did these presentations. So one shoe is going to have to drop before the other.
Obviously, there's a critical path here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
Close the school, we're not going to be moving the town into Woodward.
Yeah, right. And I think the other, I believe it was Roger that mentioned it, is, and Kathy, you'll see this as you work through it, is, we obviously have shown the school administration being pretty much adjacent to the town administration. However, there is an option for the school administration at the townhouse. The item I did not bring up because it was outside of the scope of the consultant study is, if you recall, Greg, 1 or 2 meetings ago also mentioned the excess space at Trottier when we were talking about that for the school administration. So that comment that Roger made is not lost, at least on me, in terms of, I do think there needs to be a broader conversation, obviously, with Greg and the school committees and the town administrations, candidly, for both towns, of where's the right spot for them. And then that may create flexible options for other user groups, depending upon where that decision lands.
Was it well attended as far as the Zoom piece?
There was approximately, on average, 50 people in the Zoom at any one time. There was 5 committees that had quorums present, and there was public comment from almost every committee that had quorums. And then there was, obviously, you did not have a quorum from advisory, but there were some of your members that spoke. And then Council on Aging did not have a quorum, but did have some people that spoke. And then Rec Commission did not post, but the director spoke there. So pretty much every user group that I can count had strong representation there.
Okay, good.
And it was also very nice, Katura, to see the full school committee there, just to show the continued collaboration there. I thought that was a telling sign, plus obviously all the school administration members that were there.
Yeah, I was happy about that too. I thought that was good.
All right.
So
Keith is not
Jason, John Lemieux is here. I don't know when you want to bring him over, but he's here.
Yep, I see that, and I'm happy to bring him over now, but I'm just cognizant of you two
Jason,
starting.
Do you
there
see
he is.
Greg on the other side by any chance? I don't see him in the attendees.
I don't.
Okay.
I just see John from Vertex.
I'm attempting to get him right now. I'll hopefully have him within a few minutes.
Okay. Here's what I will do is I'm going to bring John over and mainly just allow him to introduce himself to Katura, because Kathy and I have worked with him in various ways in the past, but just to do that, because I know he's also knows the administration from other work Vertex has done. So does that work for you, all of you?
Sounds good.
Hey, John.
Hey guys, what happens if I click the stay as attendee button when you do that?
You can't speak.
What if I don't want to? What if I don't want to join? How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Hey, John, how are you?
Hey Keith, how are you?
Not bad.
So, John, I just wanted to maybe give you a chance to introduce yourself to Katura,
Sure.
in your background, and maybe for anyone that's watching the video after that may not know the services you've provided to the town before. And then
Sure.
obviously, once we're ready with Greg and Keith, we'll turn it over to you and Kathy.
Okay, great. So Katura, nice to meet you. My name is
too.
John Lemieux. I've been with Vertex for, gosh, it'll be 22 years in May. Kind of head up their owner's project management service area. I have a civil engineer by training, both undergrad and grad school, and have been doing primarily solely OPM work for, gosh, 12, 13 years now in the company. We were the OPM, in fact, for the public safety building at the school, in the town. We also did a little work for Keith on a facilities condition assessment for the NERI way back. So that was the initial, my initial exposure to the school and the roof issues. And along the way, we also acquired a firm called Compass Project Management, basically tripled the size of our OPM staff. And their work was primarily all in municipal OPM as well as higher ed OPM. So, you know, between our combined efforts of our staff, we probably have about 20 or so, 25 schools with the MSBA. And some of those and a few other schools without the MSBA. So we've built schools for cities and towns who've participated and not participated. We've also done work, you know, much of that work is in the core program, you know, the submit the statement of interest and we're talking about a new reno or an addition or a new building. We've also done a lot of work in the accelerated repair program, probably about 40 different school projects, which are roofs, windows, boilers, kind of that other avenue that you're not going down right now. But bottom line is that we have a lot of experience with the MSBA, and I collaborated with Tim Bonfatti in our office to help this group kind of put together the information that Kathy put together.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So what's the verdict, Keith?
Yeah, we were able to make contact with him, and I'm just waiting for him to join. I'd say we could start, and we probably could be able to get him caught up to speed pretty quick.
Okay. Keith, maybe before I turn it to Kathy, I know we all received an email yesterday, but just more for the public. Can you just describe where we're at under the superintendent's update related to the statement of interest for the Neary School?
Yeah, so we did receive a communication yesterday from MSBA that says that they may be in touch with us within the next couple of weeks, maybe even by the end of next week, about the status of the project. However, I don't know if that's just an update or whether that's a determination. It was done through an inquiry that I had about getting back into the MSBA portal to create statements of interest for other projects in the district. That's what prompted that response. So we know we wanted to be able to share that, although we don't know exactly what that message meant, whether it is a final decision or just an update. So that's the latest that I have in regards to MSBA as of now.
I know the answer to what it is because I talked to Katie, Keith.
Oh,
So
you do?
it's going to be final.
Oh, well, okay. Very well.
They're trying to not overlap the two SOI periods. So they want people to know what the answer is so they know whether they need to reapply.
Oh, that's a good, that'd be great. Because that was an interesting part of thinking about our timeline and what we were doing with the other projects and comparing that to what we were doing with the core project for Neary. So it's very good to hear.
All right. Floor is yours, Kathy.
All right. Okay, so John, do you know Keith?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Just want to make sure. All right. So let's give credit when credit's due about with what I'm about to say. This is mostly John Lemieux's work that you're about to see. In fact, it is John Lemieux's work. So let's talk big picture, and then let's actually focus on the spreadsheet. I think the spreadsheet is so helpful that he put together as far as what might happen here. And let's clarify a few facts. I mean, everybody remembers Emily Latella from Saturday Night Live. So, I'd always thought the reimbursement rate for Southborough was 37% for the 3 existing elementary schools. Excuse me, the 2 and then Trottier. So don't know why I got it, but I had it in my head. So I thought that's what we've been using as far as the assumption for Neary. So I just want to go back and look at what the effective reimbursement rate was that we received back in 2000, 2004 for the 3 schools, because the effective reimbursement rate is what really matters. That's the cash we're really going to get. It's not the gross rate that, it certainly plays a factor into it, but it's the effective one that's going to tell us what we get. So I just wanted to see what we got back then. And so I started looking at the audit of the 3 projects, and the Southborough reimbursement rate was 63%. I went, wait a minute, 1 minus 63 is 37. I said, we got these numbers reversed. Well, we don't. It's just, I said, I don't believe in coincidences, but it was a coincidence. So the current DOR published reimbursement rate is 38.37%. And I got that straight from the horse's mouth a couple hours ago. So it's a little bit off, John, from what you had. And this is, DOR uses this rate for a lot of things. It's not just this. So they establish that based on wealth factors, and it does change year to year slightly. So 38.37% is what it is today. So that's kind of our starting point as far as the most we could get. That's the base rate. Then from that, you can add more points for a couple things. And John, help me if I say this wrong. But if you are LEED certified and can show energy cost reductions of, I think, at least 20%, you can add another 2% to that. And then there's another 2% that I'm a little bit unsure about what you'd have to do, but I think it relates to capital cost, et cetera. But so there's probably another 4% that you could add to the 38. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it has to do with your maintenance planning at the school, your maintenance programs, and it can be up to 2%. So if you have the best, most unbelievable maintenance plan, staff, program, recording, kind of all of that, you can get the 2. I don't know if I've ever seen a 2. They do happen. Usually you see 1.6, 1.72, something in that range. But it's their review of those documents. So that's the kind of thing where if you get invited in and you decide to participate, this whole eligibility period you'd be moving into, that's the stuff they kind of weed through and figure out numbers for that. And just to say right now, those extra 2 points for the LEED related stuff, you're either going to go after a Mass CHIPS high performing school kind of route, or you're going to go LEED, and that changes too. So we'd have to follow up on that. But LEED is typically LEED silver is the target, and the silver designation roughly is what would get you the 2 points. So you're chasing that the whole way. So you're doing it, you're getting reimbursements the whole way, but it has to happen. So at the end of the day, if you fail to meet that LEED scorecard and it slips, your 2 points will slip as well. And it's kind of made worse by the fact that, you pay the piper at the end, do you know what I mean? Because you're getting your reimbursements along the way as if you're going to make it. Everybody tries to make it. Everybody, I mean, it's silly to not go after it. And there's really enough meat in what you can do in any set of construction to get to that silver. If they were mandating gold or platinum, that's a much higher bar to try to reach. But silver, most towns can achieve silver pretty effectively as part of a construction project.
Okay, good to know. So Keith and Katura make note of the maintenance plan that we need. Okay, so 38.37, possibly to increase by up to 4 points. It's good to know it's not 0 or nothing, or 2 or nothing, that you can get in between. So that's good to know. The reason you don't get the 38.37% is because the MSBA caps the cost that they're willing to reimburse you against. And the cap is pretty low compared to current construction costs, especially, with what we're going through now with the inflation that we are enduring. So again, this is a new number from this morning. So we've confirmed that the current construction cost cap is $360 per square foot. We've also confirmed that the reimbursable cost per student for furniture, fixtures, equipment, computers, whatever, is $1,200. So that's kind of 2 numbers that are definitely current. That's what they're using. And neither one will cover our actual cost. So therefore, you try to figure out what you think the costs are going to be and look at what effectively you'll be reimbursed when you consider those caps. So what John has done in this spreadsheet that we're going to go over is that let's use 16.9 as an estimate of what we might be able to get if we were to participate in the MSBA program from beginning to end.
Yeah, just a quick note on that. So the note I sent Kathy just before this, we're talking about numbers to a decimal point. The reality is that what we see from the published reimbursement rate to what we're talking about is the effective rate, combination of all of those things. And obviously there's, cost per square foot, which is now $360. It was $350. FF&E and technology, 2 separate numbers at $1,200 a piece, depending on what type of school you're building. That $1,200, may work for technology for a grade school. Furniture probably won't. You get to a middle high school, neither number works. You got to put more money in the budget, but you'll get that 1,200 times whatever the agreed upon enrollment is. And that's a whole other part of the equation as well. But that effective, the difference between the reimbursement rate and this effective number Kathy's talking about is, anywhere from 18, 17, 18 to 20 points. We see that number drop from a number. So, if you're a Lawrence and you're 80%, your effective rate at the end is going to be somewhere around 60. Westboro right now, their number is 48 and change, and we're trending just under 30. Around that's kind of how it works. So the fact that the cost cap just went up is a great acknowledgement of inflating prices. The problem is that $10 increase from MSBA doesn't always cover the $50 a square foot increase we may have seen in the marketplace. So therefore the numbers are always moving and changing a little bit. Other cost caps include, if your construction costs exceed 8% of construction, so the work around the school. So as an example, if you have a site that's full of ledge, that's going to cost you a ton of money to blast ledge and that sort of thing, MSBA pays to 8%. So at a $10 million building, once you exceed $800,000 for site work, every dollar beyond that becomes ineligible. So all of these things contribute to this knockdown in points. Again, so just to remember that as you see what we did, it's really based on a set of assumptions, and it's good from a 20 to 30,000 square foot level to kind of show you the difference between weighting, not weighting, MSBA, not MSBA. But as you saw, numbers have already changed a little bit from what we did. We used 36.89 as the reimbursement rate and took away 20. Well, now we know you're at 38.3, so that goes up a little. You could take away 20 points, you could take away 18, but you're still, the order of magnitude is there to kind of show you the differences between them.
And we're definitely on the low end of the scale because the minimum reimbursement rate is 31, the max is 80. For example, John said New Bedford is like 78 and change, and it's certainly not as wealthy as we are, so you could see why that would be the case. So, if 31's the lowest, we're 38, so we're not the lowest, but we're pretty low. Okay, so that's kind of how the process works to determine what Southborough would receive from funding. The other thing, hey, Greg, the other thing that's quite different from last time is that you do get your funding up front during the construction period. They've got a portal you log into and request reimbursement. They give it to you in 15 days. So with the current 3 schools that are about to be paid off, we get a piece of it over the life of the bond. So we're still getting it. So this is quite different as far as how they fund it. The MSBA came into play in 2004. So when we built the 3 prior schools, we were dealing with the predecessor entity, which was just the Department of Education. So lots changed since the MSBA was actually formed in 2004.
Kathy, do you or John want to screen share anything, just so I can give you co-host privileges?
Yeah, we're going to. I want to show you what change in the spreadsheet will do. Just a little change in assumption in a second, because what I'm going to say in a second and see if John agrees is I don't think we're ready to conclude MSBA or not. I think we still go forward. We're going to find out next week whether they're invited in, and then we continue forward. But I still think it's not a foregone conclusion, yes or no, even though Jason will say, well, when I talked to you last time at our last public meeting, the study committee, you kind of thought we should. But at that point, I didn't realize that our 37 would be reduced to possibly 17, which of course is a big difference. And
Kathy, do you want me to drive so that I can take you through the spreadsheet? I'll make the change if you want.
Well, it's so easy to make, so that's fine. So all I did, John, was I changed the 4 to 6 to see what it did, and it takes it negative on the last 2 as far as the benefit goes. So that's how little of a change would make you reach a different conclusion. So that's what I'm saying. It doesn't take much of a change in these assumptions that have been made here to get you to a different place. If the 16.9 is lower or the escalation in cost is higher than what John has shown here, then you are probably going to conclude there's not that much benefit money-wise to being part of the MSBA process, and therefore you may not want to do it. So, okay, so why don't we just, so John, I'm going to I'll share the spreadsheet. Well, whoever shares it's got to do the changes. So do you want me to do it or you want to do it?
Yeah, I just wanted, but I just don't want to have to tell you, hey, Kathy, switch here, switch there. So if you want to, Jason, you want to let me share and I'll make the changes.
Okay.
You both have sharing capability, so.
All right, so let me try this. Okay, can you see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay, so first things first, I know this looks busy. First thing I'm going to do here is I am going to, because it lets me edit, of course. Stand by. Okay, first things first, I'm going to change this to 38.
You zoom in a smidge.
Yeah, one sec.
Yep.
So John, I'd already done it and it didn't, you put the 16.9 in as a hard, so it wasn't related to the 30s, to that cell. So
Oh, I did? Okay. All right.
Tara, you go to view options where it says you are viewing John Lemieux's screen.
I'm on an iPad. Does that work?
Never mind.
So if we did,
I exited my area of expertise.
Okay. It makes me feel better.
So if everybody, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. I'll slide around a little bit. Oh, that's too much. That is way too much. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Perfect.
All right, so just for the beginning, for an understanding of everything with the MSBA starts with enrollment. Okay, how many kids are going to be in the school? So I had the benefit of getting the enrollment information, all right, from the RLS study. Make sure I have this right.
Yep, that's right.
Yes, the RLS study. And if you look for grades 3, 4, and 5, try not trying to make you dizzy here. We had, pushing it out to 2030, we had 146 in grade 3, 140 in grade 4, and 117 in grade 5. So we needed to start somewhere, okay? And that's what we have here. So we're going to focus just on this first column. The columns to the right are just derivatives based on time, okay? So if you take that, you've got 403 kids that would be in this school based on enrollment moving forward. Everything with the MSBA, as you'll find out if you say yes, if you get invited and you say yes, first thing you'll do is agree on enrollment, and everything goes from there. Once you agree on enrollment, you get 150 square feet per kid, okay, to build the school. So that brings you out to 60,450 square feet. From there, there's always going to be something that a town's going to want that won't necessarily be in the space planning, whether that's additional sped space, an auditorium, which you don't typically get in the program with the MSBA. For a grade school, they do more like cafetoriums, kind of multi-use space. You can have an auditorium, but bottom line is there's always going to be something you're going to say, we really should put this in the building, whether it's additional public space or something like that. So we just went with 10%, just a place to start. That gives us a total square footage of 66,495 square feet, okay? So hold there for a second. So we're going to switch for a minute, and I'm going to show you kind of how we get to pricing, okay? Pricing per square foot and why that's important. Obviously, you've all heard a ton lately about, costs, construction costs. They're crazy, and what do you do? So when you're budgeting a project like this, what the MSBA requires is if you get invited in, you get into feasibility and ultimately schematic design. At the end of that schematic design, you are going to have a number you have to live with for the rest of the project. And you're not even done designing it yet. So you're trying to pick a number and escalate that number out to some point in the future. All right. So what we did here is we established a timeline that said, okay, if Southborough gets invited in, your midpoint of construction is probably January of 2027. Well, how did we do that? So just really quickly, here's a brief schedule we put together. So let's say, you're invited in, and we've got a non-MSBA version here too. We'll go through that in a little bit. Town meeting approves the project. And again, these dates are soft, but they're just to get an order of magnitude timeline wise. Your eligibility period, let's assume you get invited in, okay? And again, we didn't quite know when that letter was going to come or not come. Let's say you get invited in, I had said the first of the year. They typically give you 9 months for that eligibility period to get all that stuff together. And that's if you don't get slotted. And what that means is what we're starting to see on some schools is they, when they come out with their new list, they may say, okay, these 8 schools are invited in, but the eligibility period for you in Southborough won't start for 3 months. And for you in Medford won't start for 6 months. So yeah, you're invited in, but your clock won't even start ticking for some period of time. The reason for that is if they invite 8 schools in at one time, they're going to get 8 responses back in all at the same time. And their staff is going to have to review and process all of those things. And they end up with a series of projects stacked. If you go to the MSBA board meetings, typically you'll see 3 or 4 projects that come up all in the same phases at a time of a project. So what they're trying to do is set their workflow for moving forward. Okay. So let's assume though, for our discussion, you're in right away. Southborough, you're on the first, you're up to in the batting order first. So we looked at 9 months for the eligibility period, feasibility and schematic, we looked at 18 to 24 months, okay? And the days, don't be thrown, the days are work days, not calendar days. But so we went with the long version here. So let's say essentially 2 years, okay, to get through feasibility and schematic. At the end of that schematic, you've got a number. And now they say, okay, you've got 3 months to get us a vote to approve it. And then at some point in the future there, assuming there's an MSBA board meeting right after, they say, Southborough, did you vote? You say yes. They say, okay, come on in. We're going to move ahead with the design. Your town has voted and gone ahead. All of this is to show you 10 more months to design, 2 months to bid. Construction is 24 months. So we needed to get to a start date so that we could define a midpoint of construction value. So if we were looking at a 24-month build for your project that started sometime in January of 26, the midpoint would be January of 27. All right. So all that's to be able to figure out what's our cost per square foot for construction. All right. If we look at a job that we just bid in December, not a school, okay, a single story building, but true market conditions for a building, steel and wood, $617 a square foot. That is just bare construction cost to build the building. That is the bid that came in. So we said, all right, how do we get from January of 22 to January of 27? Carried 4% as the escalation, okay? Could it be more? Yes. Could it be less? Probably not. 4 is a good solid number. Could be 5, could be 6, and that was Kathy was referring to. We can tweak that number and we'll do that at the end and show you. But for this baseline, let's do this. So if we escalate this to the midpoint of construction, 4% a year, your 617 becomes 750. So we go back to the calculations. Okay, 750 rounds up to 751. 751 times 495 square feet is $49,916,124. That's just the cost to build the building. And to that, for this back of the napkin discussion, we're adding 25% for soft costs. Soft costs include the following. They include your design fees, your OPM fees, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Basically, if you picked up the building and shook it, everything that would fall out of the building that wasn't fixed, all of those things are soft costs. In there, we also include contingencies. Okay, there's 5-6% of that number we hope you never have to spend, but those of us that have built things know you will spend some of it. There's going to be something that comes up, so you need contingency. Why you especially need contingency is because you're going to the town, in this case, for a number of $62.3 million. Can't go back. Okay, if we know one thing, we know after an ask, you got to go once and only once. All right. So in this, so we'll continue down with the equation. 49 million plus 25% soft costs gives you $62.4 million. Okay, MSBA reimbursement rate is, as we just said, right now 38.37, not adjusted by any factors, and it's better to assume you're not going to get them for right now, so you know a little bit more. But we know that that effective rate, you know, the reimbursement rate on eligible costs translates to an effective rate on all costs of about 18.4%. Okay, meaning 18.4% of 62 million is 11.4 million, 11.5. That would be your grant. Okay, meaning the town's share would be 50.9 million. Now, the MSBA requires at any vote that you're voting the whole thing. And why they want you to vote the whole thing is they don't want to get involved with the town gambling on cash flow, gambling on bonds, that get bond rates and stuff. That's internal. They want to know that if you're being invited in, you have voted and the town has supported 62.395 million. But you know, in that language of the vote says there is a grant from the MSBA based on eligible costs, blah, 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 and that max grant is 11.4 million. Okay, so that's kind of the MSBA version. What we then did for these columns to the right is show you what happens to the cost plus 6 months, plus 12 months, plus 18 months. So let's say you get invited in, but they say your slot comes in 6 months. Or if by some chance they said, no, come back next year. Okay, that's plus 12 or 18. And really all of that is the cost per square foot on the other page escalated again and again and again for those periodic increases. Okay, so what happens if we do the non-MSBA version? Okay, non-MSBA version, it's all the same math. Okay, but the biggest difference when you look over here, these two schedules, it's pretty evident. Time. Okay, time. If you decided, or if you weren't, first of all, if you weren't invited in and decided to go, or you were invited in and said, we've thought about it, but we can save this time frame, you know, you can save money because time is money. Obviously, the first thing is that with that timeline, you could probably get to a midpoint of construction almost 2 years earlier. And again, a lot depends on, you know, there's lots of variables, but these were assumptions made that were creatively made so that everything ended either in January or July to make the calculations a little bit easier. Okay. But, you know, if you look, you know, you're probably saving about $55 a square foot at that 4% escalation. So what does that do for what does that do to your bottom line? Well, the project that was a share of, you know, a $62 million project with potential Southborough share of 50.9 becomes, instead of 62, becomes 57, but you own the whole thing. Okay, you're not getting any reimbursement back. So here you go. What we did is we took each of those MSBA options and subtracted against the non-MSBA option. Obviously, this one would cost you $6.7 million more, but you'd get it 2.1 years sooner. $5.7 million more, 2.6, 4.7, 3 years sooner, you know, kind of playing that out. To Kathy's point, if we were to change this number to 6, suddenly these MSBA, non-MSBA numbers, you know, obviously the costs are more. Okay, if things escalate more, you know, not only are you getting it sooner, at a certain point, you're getting it cheaper, depending on how long you wait. So I just threw a tremendous amount of info at you. So
okay, but go back down, scroll back down to where you just were to make sure this hits home. So when he changed it to 6, you still see 3 negative numbers, which means there's still a benefit for using MSBA, but the fourth one's now gone the other way. So there's no benefit to using MSBA as far as money goes, if the project is the later one, as far as the end date for the MSBA calendar. And when I did it, because I had kept the 16.9, I didn't change it to the 18.9. It actually made that next last one almost bad too. So again, it just depends. You've got more than one variable. So when you've got an equation with more than one variable, you can get lots of different answers depending on which variables you change. And keep in mind too, that he picked midpoint as far as the costs go, but if you look at the actual completion date, look how far out we are with the MSBA. The earliest would be January of 28, right? And the latest would be July of 29. The town might be able to whack off 2 years from the first one if they did it all on their own. But it's still 4 years away, 22, 23, 24, 25. So we're still talking about a project that is still going to take a while to bring to fruition either way, but long SBA.
And the reason why midpoint of construction is kind of the standard to what in the MSBA program, that's what they want to see costs escalated to. They want to make sure that, clearly if something, if you're buying something on day one, you're trying to get the average of the cost on day one and the cost of day 100. So you book the cost at day, look at the 50% of the way through. Yes, it's the higher cost per square foot at the beginning, but in the end, by carrying that, you've covered yourself for the duration. So the midpoint of construction language is really what the MSBA looks for. And that's, as this process, if you were to proceed with or without the MSBA, much like we did on the public safety building, is you would be doing cost estimates along the way, so that once you agree to this scope and budget at schematic design, that's the number that everybody knows and agrees to. You have that, those different waypoints along the way to be able to check and make sure, okay, are we still at 62 million? Okay, and if we're not, what do we do to get back to it? And you do that at design development and then once or twice in construction as well. And just a note about the timeline with the MSBA. Clearly, the eligibility period takes time, 9 months to begin with. The rest of the design, similar timeframes, but the reality is with the feasibility schematic phase, it's really long. It's longer. And why it is that the MSBA will require you to study every iteration of a new NERI. It would be a new NERI, a renovated NERI, a NERI that's part renovated and part new, 2 stories, 3 stories, like all the different machinations of it, so that when a resident calls and says, they told me it's a new school, it's only gonna be a new school, how come they didn't look at renovating the old one? No, the MSBA will force you to look in this process at renovating the old one, so that you can check all the boxes and say that a true, thoughtful look was done with all these things. The other thing too is that along the way in that feasibility schematic period, there are 2 hard stops where you submit items in feasibility. And it's really the process of, and this was in the slide deck, I think, that was said, you start with the many options, they become the few options to get to the one option. Well, if you do this yourself and know that, okay, we can look at renovation, but we're going to put it here, we know roughly what we're doing, there's less stops along the way. The MSBA has these required submissions, wait, they comment, and DESE is involved as well, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They comment on the programs and those things as well. Things you don't have to do if you do it yourself. But obviously doing it with them, could make you, could save you $5-6 million bucks. So
John, just a couple of questions. The
Sure.
first is, obviously the next couple of weeks we'll have a better idea of, whether it's the 3 months, the 6 months, or a much longer time in terms of having MSBA potentially being a partner. The second is, even if we're invited into the SOI period, that doesn't mean that MSBA will support the project. There's still other votes along the way that could actually trigger us.
No, I'm going to stop sharing too. It's a great question, Greg. But the reality is the MSBA makes invitations to communities because they want to build a school with you. They're not going to invite you in and then fight you. What they're going to do is question you along the way to make sure you're doing what they view as the educationally right thing, the physically right thing along the way. There's other, once you don't get this invitation, and then as long as you follow their steps and their math, you're in. And the biggest hurdle for you after that is getting the citizens of Southborough to say, yeah, we're in. When they get and see that nut and realize, okay, what's that number? There's the whole other part of this equation of selling the project. That's That's part of your project team helps with that. The people on this call help with that, and independent parent groups help with that. That's to me the biggest hurdle. Once you get the invite, there's a rule book and a checklist. And as long as each one of those submissions gets done in a timely manner, the ball keeps rolling. So really you have money, you have to ask for money from your citizenry to be able to fund feasibility schematic and what that number is. And that gets you to the end point. And then at that end point, you know what the whole nut is, and then you move forward from there. And whether you deliver the job through the traditional design bid build method, meaning you design the whole thing and go out to hard bid at the end, or you bring a CM, a construction manager, in partway through, and then they participate in the process with you, you still have agreed to that number at SD at town meeting, let's say in spring of 2023, and that's your go point. When you do it yourself, the only other benefit you have to doing it yourself is if you had flexibility with asking for money, you could actually ask for money more than once. You could ask for money for feasibility schematic. You could ask for money to further the design. Then you could ask for construction dollars with a bid in hand. The MSBA does not allow you the flexibility of being able to go to the residents with bids in hand to say, this is exactly what it's going to cost. And we know that because we've done this whole very specific and prescribed process. But we also put it to bid to show you, the citizens, that we had been carrying $750 a square foot, and guess what? We got it for $720. You know what I mean? The other way with the MSBA, we are using all of our wizardry to be able to put together the best number we can, and escalating that number out to a date certain, and then you have to hit schedule, and you have to a little bit, when I say cross your fingers, but you can put contingency in. But if you over contingency it, no one's going to vote for it. It'd be easy. We'll put $1,000 a square foot and we'll be fine. We're going to come in under bid. The citizens of Southborough aren't going to vote for a school that's $1,000 a square foot for construction. So it's finding that right balance along the way.
So I guess my other question, and it's probably more for Jason and Kathy, really is around the impact of borrowing and timing of borrowing. That I don't see that factored in this equation. I know it's hard to project out what finance and borrowing rates will be, but that is, to me, that's a significant variable. And I think the longer we wait, the more risk, just in terms of, it's easier to project maybe a year and a half out versus 5 years out what the interest rates be in terms of bonds.
So Greg, I know you haven't had a chance to read my memo. I've got a section in that memo about this. So what our treasurer normally does, he can't borrow money up front and lock it in for perm financing when there's no project yet. That I've confirmed. It's impossible to do. You can't do that. So what he tends to do is he borrows temporarily while the project's being built. And then he puts perm financing at the end of the project. So what he could do is instead, he could go ahead and do perm financing earlier. So that's the one thing he could do if he's worried about interest rates going up. But, as Jason and I've talked about, we can't predict interest rates. We know the Fed's meeting today and tomorrow. We know they're going to raise the Fed funds rate. We know that interest rates are going to start going up. But we thought they were going to go up a couple of years ago too, and then the pandemic hit. So you're not going to predict interest rates. So you're right. Interest rate risk is not built into John's spreadsheet. That's a fact. But there's a risk either way, whether the town builds it or whether we do MSBA. And, you could conceivably see interest rates going up and then coming back down too. So I don't know how we're going to quantify that. I don't have a good answer to how you would be able to put that into this model. So we may not be able to do that piece of it unless Brian says, look, let's just do this. Let's go ahead and do perm financing up front with the number that the architect estimates, and we're done. But then, of course, I don't think he's going to say that because he wants to finance it when he knows what the final numbers are. If you remember, the public safety building costs a lot less in the end than what got approved at town meeting, a lot less. And so therefore, if we had financed it up front with what got approved, we would have had excess debt on our hands that we probably couldn't have done anything about because of the way community bond financing works. So it's a good point. I'm not sure we could do much about it though.
Yeah, I think market timing is probably not
No, no.
In
And-
general, not a good practice.
And when
let me
these,
just go, John, sorry.
no, I apologize. When these numbers get put through and presented, they are always net of borrowing costs. MSBA doesn't care about borrowing costs. They don't cover it at all. However, whatever magic you do internally, as long as you're not, the one caveat is you really don't want to be getting any other funding sources from anybody else. It can impact your reimbursement. They've made a carve out for some energy related stuff, but again, you got to check the regs as you get closer. I mean, typically as the process develops, as the price is moving towards that schematic submission and the number, it's really a strategic, I'm not going to say game, but process of letting the numbers out without really agreeing to a number, because you're kind of working towards it. And that's, in those months before this SD is finished, as you're moving in towards those community meetings and, sharing info and all of that, that's when the finance committee needs to work their magic and say, okay, based on what we see now and the average price of a home in Southborough, this is going to mean this to the average taxpayer. People want to see the big number, then they want to know what it means to them on a yearly basis. They don't care about the sausage that I just showed you guys. They care about total. How much are we going to get from the state? And if we get that from the state, what's it mean to me? And that's the magic. And no different than public safety or any other project you guys have done.
So,
And to be clear, we don't get reimbursed for interest because they pay their piece up front. In the previous regime, they didn't, because they paid it over time. They did reimburse you for their piece of the interest, but that's gone. So that's not what we do today. So John's right. They don't take that into account because they're going to write you the check right up front as the project's being built.
So I'm gonna let Katura go to Katura, see if she has any questions. I just wanted to round out before I'll go with my questions after Katura, but round out the answer that Kathy gave on the interest to Greg. Capital planning at the town level has had some discussions with Brian of whether his borrowing strategy has evolved in terms of and we saw a little bit of it on public safety, where they actually bonded much earlier in the project than they anticipated because of the rates. And we saved about 10 million over the course of 20 years in interest alone.
Wow.
It had nothing to do with the principal savings that John and Kathy are very familiar with. So that was a game changer in terms of everyone's tax rate, right? We're not going to be able to predict that, right? And I think that everyone can, agree on that. But what I did learn is, especially if we have a town meeting vote, Brian would be hard pressed, unless the interest rate environment said otherwise, to not pre-bond a good chunk of it. You're never going to bond the full thing, like Kathy said, but I do think we could model potential scenarios using a range. Pick your number, 3-4% for interest on certain periods of time, and just be clear with, again, the assumptions, right, that have gone into everything Kathy and John have done here today, just to show the relative impact. And I just think back to the slide we had for public safety. We said exactly what the interest rate was and what the impact was going to be, and we were hoping for better. We obviously struck gold, to be honest with you, in the big picture there. But I think that is something that could be modeled out. But I think the other part of this is everything else that's on the town's capital plan that would come off potentially in this scenario. Just thinking back to obviously the presentation most of us were at last week, in terms of what would happen with a repurposing, but also bigger picture, what else is out there? When is the town going to need a new ladder truck? When is the town going to need this and that? So I do know that we have the ability as a town to model some of that out with our financial advisor. So that would be my, where I think capital planning should potentially go with this information here after today, if the subcommittee is on board. I'm just going to plant that seed. I don't want a reaction yet, but I think that's we have to put more numbers on this spreadsheet if everyone's comfortable with the spreadsheet. But I'm going to pause there and go to Katura to see if Katura has any questions.
Jason, there's one thing we should clarify before Katura asks for questions. The spreadsheet that John has done assumes new construction. Tear it down, build it. So we haven't looked at the difference that a renovation might generate, which I want John to talk about in a second, as far as what the
Sure.
MSBA would do differently if
Great
it
point.
were a reno instead of a new build.
Okay, so that was gonna be my question too. So Katara, let's ask questions on new first, and then we'll come back to reno.
Okay, so that was actually going to be my very first question, which is this looked like it contemplated new construction as opposed to any sort of renovation. Okay. I guess, so when I look at the timeline for doing it without the MSBA, I know that construction projects are notorious for delays and taking much longer than anticipated. Is this a sort of a generous timeline so that we're not underestimating what it might actually end up being?
No, I will say that we talked about this, the only caveat in here is how do these stop periods that are known with the MSBA, how do they fall with board meetings? There are certain things that can only be done at an MSBA board meeting that happen on average every 2 months. So if you just miss it, and they have very hard deadlines for submissions prior to, weeks and weeks and weeks in advance. You miss the deadline, you've missed that meeting, you go to the next meeting. That being said, this schedule was put together with a realistic, but we're going to get started right now kind of view. I will tell you that, the public safety project was under budget and on time. You establish a budget that's realistic. So I'm putting 2 years on a job that nobody's designed a thing for yet. You know what I mean? So, but thinking the scope of the project, knowing that we just built a 70,000 foot elementary school in Westboro, and it was about a 16, 17 month timeline, plus the takedown of the old, I feel good with 2 years. That's a good, good comparison. What you'll find through this process, Katara, is that you have to always be a little conservative. The goal is to try to always get you good news. Always do it a little quicker, always do it a little cheaper. If we tried to put the numbers in there, the actual today numbers in there too hard, there's too much room for disappointment. You know what I mean? And that's why when the estimators do those numbers and we escalate those things out, I will tell you right now that, we do this process and let's say, you're moving forward at some point, the number might be 760, it might be 780, they might be more conservative than the number I'm showing you. Ultimately, whatever it costs, and you get that money back. But the number you go to town with through this process could be a little higher. You know what I mean? So it's, but I think the timeline's reasonable for this. I think what the goal of this was to try to illustrate, can you save time doing it yourself? Yep, you can. Because just as an example, just picking a designer, if in that process, the eligibility process, part of it is, forming the team, you've got to go ahead, put out an RFQ, get responses, rank them for OPM and designer. But with the designer, you have to go to one of the previously scheduled designer selection panels at the MSBA where they vote and the interviews happen in front of 13 people. Only 3 of them are from Southborough. The other 10 plus are from the MSBA and that board, and they help choose your designer for you. You don't even get a majority vote. That's the kind of thing that takes time. You guys want a designer for the school? We could probably turn around designer, your OPM could turn around designer RFQ for you within a month, and you'd be conducting interviews because you don't have those time schedule constraints that are put on you by the state. And listen, we do plenty of work with the state and they are a great partner. So don't get me wrong. It's just, you can be a little quicker, a little more nimble if it's just 2 parties and not 3.
John, can I just ask probably a pretty simple
Sure.
question with a simple answer? The same people who are bidding on MSBA's projects, the OPMs and construction firms, are probably the same folks who are bidding on non-MSBA projects. Is that inaccurate? Or
the more accurate statement, Greg, is the people that are voting on public projects are largely the same. Okay. So MSBA, non-MSBA, they don't care.
Okay.
They don't care because ultimately the people, it's public contracting, it's prevailing wage. It's more people who work in the public side of construction don't work in the private side. They don't care what,
irrelevant to them.
they don't care what your funding source is. They don't care how much money you're getting. They see public job for Southborough, we're in, as opposed to medical facility for, Partners Healthcare. There's some crossover, but it really is a couple of different worlds. Massachusetts is one of the only places where you can force 21 low bidders to work together on a project. That's really the state of public construction, as opposed to,
So MSBA does not bring another layer of expertise to the people who you'd be partnering with potentially on a project.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that. They are really good at what they do and their process. But they really, aside from the discussion about space needs and space planning and all of that, the people there are very, very educated about this. They're largely a lot of engineers, a lot of architects, the senior staff there. They're impressive people. They're going to question you hard to make sure you've questioned yourself hard in the process. If you come in and just, I'll use the segue, Jason, now, if that's okay for renovation. If you come in and say, we're Southborough, we want to build a 65,000 square foot new school on the existing property in back right now, they're going to say, wait, that might be the solution at the end of the day. You're going to make sure you go through all of the iterations and check. Why is that important? It's important because sometimes a renovation can give you the same solution. So the positives of renovation. Positive renovation is you get 5 extra points on reimbursement, okay? The downside of renovation is it can still cost you $700 a square foot to renovate because of all of the other indirect costs that come into it. What are those indirect costs? Well, if the school can't be occupied or partially occupied while you're working on it, where are you putting the 400 kids while the renovation takes place? The MSBA does not pay for swing space. We're in the process right now I think it's for the town of, is it Watertown? It's another group. We are building basically seats for 500 or 600 high schoolers right now for 2 years. We're building a temporary high school so that we can get them out of the high school. And whether it's a new build or a renovation, excuse me, those costs will never be recovered. So you may say, well, wait a minute, I'm only touching half the building. I'm only building a 30,000 square foot renovation. Yeah, you are. But all of those other indirect costs, when we divide them in the denominator by the total square footage, you're still at $700 a square foot. So renovation will be looked at, can be looked at. They incentivize it by giving you 5 extra points on that. But again, those 5 points still are going to be impacted by cost caps and those sorts of things. But with the MSBA, you will be forced to look in depth at all of the different options. If you were to do it yourself, I would tell you if you do it without MSBA, you'd still want to do it to a degree so that you can answer the question when someone stands up at town meeting and says, well, why didn't you reuse half of the building? You still have to be able to answer that question. But MSBA is going to make you do it, 8, 10 different ways just to challenge you to make sure.
Katura, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, no, so that was great. So my original question was just to make sure that I realize this is just an initial analysis, but that the town project only timeline was conservative enough that we weren't going to count on sort of savings that we get, and having it done sooner. And I guess the other question I had that I don't think has been addressed yet, although maybe, Jason, this is what you were getting at a little bit when you were talking about, is there some sort of savings in general from the town side that comes with having the project done a couple of years earlier? Because then that means that the town does not have to invest, are there certain things that truly could not be put off a couple more years? And so then that's a town expense over that, longer time frame. I don't know. I'm just wondering if we want to include that as a factor.
Jason, can I take that one? Because that's something I did think a lot about, and it's in the memo, maybe not flushed out completely. Katura, so to me, there's three obvious reasons not to take the MSBA funding. Well, it's timing, right? And there's 3 consequences of it. So the timing could cost money, as we've seen with the escalation, because costs could escalate. They will escalate. Question is how much, right? So it could cost more than what you actually save by doing the grant under certain assumptions. But the other 2 things that we haven't talked about is that NERI is going to need some work at some point soon if we don't get this going, right? And there's 3 things that have been identified on Jason's committee's capital plan as far as NERI goes, and they cost about $2 million for the 3 of them: parking lot, roof, and windows. So you got that. How long can you delay doing those 3? So you may be stuck having to do them and then not using them because whatever you did just tore it down. And the third thing is what you just implied, Katura. There are others that are wanting to get additional or new space. And can they really wait till 1/1/28 to move in, or 1/1/29? Look at the dates he's got here as far as the move-in date. It's a long way away. Can't answer that question today. So that's got to be considered too, as far as this ultimate decision as to whether we should use MSBA. So I still think that the decision to use it is still on the table. We continue to go forward as Keith and Greg are, and make sure we're invited in. Maybe we don't have a choice when we find out next week. But if we are invited in, then we keep going forward. But we still haven't gotten a conclusion yet as to whether we do. We'll have more facts as time goes on, right? We'll know more. We'll know what the reimbursement rate is. We'll know what construction costs are more, so we can make a better decision than we can make today. So I don't think we have concluded one way or another yet as far as MSBA, yes or no.
So in addition, Katura, to the numbers that Kathy threw out there, we know that even if everyone was patient with us, which is not going to happen with the other user groups, we know that Corderville Hall in South Union alone, which are occupied buildings with multiple departments and users right now, in less than the next 5 years, have well over $1 million of items in the town's capital plan. We have it all scheduled out, but there are certain items that are being done to keep the buildings in service right now, but have been deferred because of obviously these broader conversations. So going back, I guess, to the somewhat reaction I had to Greg's interest rate question, it's now how do we take what's on this piece of paper and schedule this all out and say, these are sure things, and then these are other variables. I think actually the town's capital side is actually the sure things. We know we need a roof at NERI. We know we're going to need windows at NERI. We know Corderville has some work that needs to be done, and those are definites, sort of thing. So I think that's an incredibly relevant question, especially if we get a deferral notice next week, saying, hey, start your statement of interest for next year. I would think that would create a much different conversation than, welcome in sort of thing. Then I think it goes to some of these timing questions that, all right, we're in, but is it a 6-month delay? We're in, but we're really in, and we're starting tomorrow, sort of thing. I think that's obviously the discussion that's probably in front of us in the next 10 days.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
Anything else from your end right now, Katura?
No, thank you for walking us through that, John. That was very, very helpful. And I really appreciate all the information here. That was great. Thank you.
Any of you, reach out with questions. Obviously, send Jason or Kathy, or if you have my email, shoot them to me, and I'll answer you all back. It's a complicated but not that complicated process, and Kathy's already hit on it. It's just so many variables, and it's timing. It really is timing.
So I wanted to kind of echo thanks to both of you for pulling this together. It's starting to kind of crystallize where we're at. And I think I feel a lot better that we have decision points in front of us so that we can make educated decisions, because I think these are critical decisions that will last well into the future. As we've gone through a lot of this process, I've always thought back to the decision makers that were making decisions about Woodward, Trotter, Neary, and Finn 20 years ago, and know that others will do the same for not only this subcommittee, but obviously the school committee, select board, advisory, and anyone else that's involved in where we go with all of this. So it's very intriguing, different than obviously what we do in our day jobs, but just very intriguing how this all works. So I guess my final question would be to John and Kathy. You touched on renovation. It clearly was on everyone's mind. Is there even a way to add a renovation column to this based on what you know, or is that just so impossible to do based on what you know about that building?
What I would suggest, oh boy, the big question is what? What are you renovating? What are you doing? You know what I mean? I would say that renovation might save you, and let me talk to Tim in the office about that. I will tell you that the majority of projects go new. There are renovations, but they are, we got involved with Oliver Ames as a surety project because the contractor went out of business, and we consulted the bonding company and brought in they brought in one of their accounts, Brait Builders, who has built a bunch of schools for the MSBA program. And seeing what those kids in that school, they were actually working in an occupied school, demising walls up all over the place, ceiling tiles missing, had a very cool industrial look to it. But if I were a parent, my God, it just was it's tough. Renos are tough. And I think at the end of the day, Jason, I'll see if there's a, is it 10% less? It would be that kind of approach to it, because not knowing if you're going to put a 20, 30, 40, 50,000 square foot addition, which obviously is new. We know what the numbers are for that. How much demo, where's the heating plant in the building? Like there's all sorts of assumptions, and, I don't know if I could give you better than here's what a renovation budget could be. I've seen renovations cost every dollar per square foot the same as new, like an historical renovation as an example. You didn't touch all the walls, but by the time you were done, the temp stuff, the things you found in the walls, the surprises you had to deal with. And the other piece with the renovation that I got to warn you on is that, let's say even you were going to put up a renovation that was 20% the size of the building. So you're going to increase the square footage of an area by 20%. If you exceed 33% of the assessed value of that building, you have to bring the entire building up to code. Structural, life safety, accessibility. As a school, I got to believe you're probably pretty good with accessibility. Good, maybe not great. Structural, I might have to open every wall, exterior wall around the corners to put new structural bracing in to meet the seismic codes. If you're over 7,000 square feet, we're putting sprinklers in the whole building. We're taking down every ceiling in the building. So you can see how, even if you do a measured renovation, there are costs. You're going to touch the whole building. And that kind of also, well, we can do it occupied, but can you? So what also happens is you may spend less, but the duration may be longer because you're trying to hit, say, 2 summers. Okay. So you just went from I am carrying 24 months, but let's say that was 18 to build and 6 to demo. You may be 24 to build plus 6 to demo. Like your duration could be longer. And although your cost per construction for goods and materials that go into the building is less, the general conditions, the costs for the contractor to manage that job at 40, 50, 60, $100,000 a month, multiply out by the extra months. So you're winning, but you're losing. Is it worth the 5 extra points on eligible costs? As you've seen, those additional 5 points also will get, an effective rate as well. So you may save $1 million and then get an extra $1 million. Is it worth $2 million, or do you do it all new? And that's you have so much to study before you get there. But I will check and see if there's a rule of thumb we could go by for this.
Katura,
Well,
I saw you
remember,
raise your hand.
Southborough has Algonquin as an example. This is what we did for Algonquin, and we know how unhappy parents were. They actually moved kids out of that school to private schools for the construction in some cases, because they were so unhappy with what their kids were going to have to endure with that expansion and construction. So we've been through this.
Well, and more important, these are little kids. That's a whole other, you add that to the mix too. That's even tougher.
Go ahead,
Can I just
Katura.
ask, don't we have the same problem if we are building new on the same site where Neary is, or would the idea be not there?
So
Do you know what I mean? You still have the issue of where to put the
No, great.
classrooms in the meantime.
We've built schools within feet of old schools, and really it becomes a trick of like the job in Westboro, the Fales Elementary School. We built it uphill from the existing. The new building was built and ready to open. We moved over Veterans Day weekend, 4 days. Everybody moved out, and all the important things there are access. Can fire get in and access now, new and old at the same time? And as long as the answer is yes to that, and you work closely with the building official and the fire chief and police, it's easy to do that. And then, you go from one section of the site being a construction site to over a weekend or a couple of week period of time. Now the other end of the site is the construction site. Now all part of a study phase where you would look at the available land and setbacks and septic and all of the things like what's the reality. But I would say, most school projects result from this, either a separate piece of land somewhere close by luck, or right on the same piece of property.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
So to round out this conversation, obviously next week's critical. The question is, do we as a committee want to do any analysis taking this and layering on the factors? I think it would require Brian Ballantyne to get involved from a town side in terms of interest rates, like whether he could range it or not. I have seen samples of other communities that have done this discussion. I think Swampscott's the one that comes to mind. I found they were looking to build 2 schools at once, and they did a whole analysis using interest rates, MSBA, non-SBA, for 1, 2, delay something 10 years, whether we want to take this to another level, whether we want to wait, or just wait until next week and regroup as soon as Greg has notification and decide where we go. But I'm just looking at a calendar and thinking about timing towards a town meeting and or timing towards being ready to speak to something in the public education that's going to need to ensue. That's what I'm just trying to figure out how we chart our course on that particular piece, because I think it's a critical component to the presentation on the 9th to the school committee that's obviously missing in the draft that I've put together to date.
I don't think we need to go further now as far as adding another variable, adding the interest rate variable. I think we need to get further in the process, because again, if we get accepted next week, we still don't have to participate. We don't have to say yes, right? We can still keep going, and then in the end say, no, thank you. We've got the option. Everybody agree with that?
But
So
we're
we
gonna
got
make a
more
pretty
time.
quick decision, right? Like Greg, do you know the exact amount of time we'll have from the second the board meets in March?
Yeah, I think there's a number of board votes required after we get invited in and signatures. So, but I think it's potentially could be a month to 2 months.
That's
You
my
get-
understanding as well.
Yeah, you get invited to give you a period of time and, to gather information, get it to them. They give you the blessing to start forming the team. You hire an OPM, you hire a designer, and then you get to the point where you sign up and do, you would have voted money already, contingent upon moving through that process. Then you'll sign a feasibility study agreement with them, which is their first commitment to a piece of money based on the dollars that you were able to get and submit to them at that reimbursement rate. It's a little different with that. They'll look you might not do it every month. You might do it a little less frequently because of the size of the bills. And that's the first, if you're not going to go, I'm sure they don't want you getting close to that agreement.
I guess, Jason, my comment to you would be, and again, as a, I think it's important that we move, that we don't let as much time pass by. We have time now to work with Brian and get him involved, because the minute we hear from MSBA, we're still going to need that data. Like, that data is still going to be important for whatever work we do moving forward. So Kathy, I
just want to make clear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do what we're talking about doing. I think you can't do it. So therefore, I don't think we should necessarily look at the interest rate question, but I do think we need to input into this. This is one thing I would add to it, is the capital cost that we're going to need to incur at some point. We've got to say, drop dead by 1/1/25, Neary's got to have a new roof one way or the other. So I think you do have to put that in there. We can do. We know when we have to do these things and when we can't wait any longer. So I think that should be incorporated in there. I just, we can't predict interest rates. So I just don't see what that's going to accomplish.
The other thing that's important to remember, guys, is, when you agree to participate with the MSBA, it's the start of a 5 to 7 year process. Okay. You're talking about a town vote for costs that I wouldn't worry too much, to Kathy's point about trying to project costs to the individual taxpayer, because that town vote on my schedule isn't until October of 24. You are that far away. You've got 9
Or
months.
MSBA or non-MSBA?
MSBA.
Okay.
Town vote's way out there. So if you're going to go with the MSBA, you've got 9 months of eligibility, followed by feasibility and schematic. So your first ask is for, $1 million or $2 million or $2 million for a feasibility study. And that's the first piece. So if you're going to study what it's going to cost to a taxpayer, that's the number, because timing wise, otherwise, who knows what the heck's going to happen to dollars and economies and inflation, 2 years from now, when you're going to be asked. That's the big ask.
Okay. So Kathy, would you be comfortable if I take the current capital plan and expand upon whatever final spreadsheet you and John come up with, just to try to schedule it out without interest rates?
Yeah, I think we definitely should put the senior center halves, I'm hoping we really don't have to do anything to the South Union, but whatever, put it in there. So we know that, if we don't have this done by 1/1/25, we are going to get new windows at Erie, because we have no choice. Our roof's going to fall in, whatever. So yeah, I think those should be on there. And we can talk more about the interest rate as far as whether it really would make any sense and provide any value to do. So I'm not saying no. It just seems to me that you can't predict interest rates. So therefore, I'm not sure why you would do that.
Because just as a quick aside, and I think we said this when we did the public safety building, people always remember the first number. The minute you tell them it's $400 a household, and then a year and a half from now you tell them it's $600 a household, well, you told me this is, so that's the only, and Greg, I totally understand it. Like, the engineer side of me says, yeah, tell me what that number is, let me know. But the problem is for as many reasons as there are to say it, there's as many reasons to not say it.
No, I like Kathy's approach. What are those known costs, those known projects that are on the horizon? And I also, I'm making a assumption, which I probably shouldn't do, is that we're not going to be invited in. And any work that we can do between now and by the time we learn we're not going to get invited in, is just work that we would have had to do anyway. So that's my.
Well, why do you think that, Greg?
I don't know. I just
don't answer.
Again.
Don't just wait a week.
Yeah, I'm making an assumption that I should not make. So, and wasting air.
So I know we have another agenda item, which was the start of the framework of the presentation that I put together. looking at the clock, I would like to propose we do the following, unless anyone has any objections. I would like to propose that we schedule a meeting sometime late next week. If Greg, but however, we be nimble. And if we haven't heard anything from MSBA, we just push it to like early the following week. We just have to, work within the 48-hour limits of open meeting law. But really, like, I would probably aim for next Friday, pending schedules for a second, to really focus on the presentation. It will allow Kathy to take what she's put in her memo and add it into the slides. Don't worry about formatting, Kathy. And then we review the presentation as the sole purpose of the meeting so that we can make a recommendation based on what we've learned from the MSBA by that time, because it's becoming very clear that we will have a decision from the MSBA, absent them changing what they've told Greg, before the next school committee meeting. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So now the fun part of scheduling. I would argue we should go to the 4th unless schedules, February 4th, unless schedules don't allow as much time as possible to hear that decision. Now, we could get it Wednesday, we could get it Thursday. We may not get it by Friday, but I would anchor to that date unless someone says that's not a good date for them. So Greg, Keith, I'll start with you.
4th works well. Anytime after 11:30.
Kathy and Keith, go ahead. Does that line up with
I'm good
yours?
for that.
Okay. Kathy, Katura, how does after 11:30 work on the 4th?
I can do after 12. I have a morning thing, but I could do 12 o'clock on until about 3. I have to be done at 3.
Okay, Kathy?
I am fine for 12 on also.
Okay, so I'm going to propose 12:30 based on my schedule and hearing all of that. So I will post for 12:30 on the 4th with the intent of reviewing the presentation and discussing whatever feedback Greg has received from MSBA. And then if by Thursday we have not received anything, I will likely reach out for a backup date to reschedule to that following week. But we'll probably keep the date regardless. My guess is just to work through the presentation, given we didn't do that today. That work for everyone?
Sounds good. Can I just mention one thing about the presentation if you're going to be working on it in the meantime? The only thing that I like, the main thing that I was going to say is just, I wonder if at the beginning we want to add something, maybe a slide or something with a good background on the town's perspective of why we're approaching this. I remember when we first started meeting at one point, this maybe it was close to a year and a half ago or fall of 2020, Kathy gave a really good, just sort of maybe 10-minute, it doesn't have to be that long, but, just an overview of like what's happening in the town, like the borrowing and the debt and the capital expenses that are coming up and all of that. And just like a little bit of like super high level overview of how we got here. And I know you have the slide about like what the charge of this subcommittee is and all of that, which is very good. But maybe just a little more something that will sort of round it out for people who, because we have a different audience at school committee meetings than you all have at your other meetings, right? It's like mainly parents and people who might not have really been tracking this from other perspectives. So I think something like that would be helpful. So I'm just throwing that out there in case you're gonna throw a slide together on that or something.
I will do that because this is the danger of having someone that's so in the details, right? Do the initial, that's the perspective I'm looking for. So candidly have been living this right too long now.
Of course, no, of course.
I love the idea. Kathy, I assume you're very supportive of that. So
Yes.
I will add that piece in and around the section of the charge, because that's actually what led to the charge, right? That's really what you're saying.
That's right.
That's why we went to the school committee and said, hey, we'd love to partner. Not sure how you want to do this. And obviously everyone was open to that discussion. So, okay. great feedback. I wish there was a way for you to just send your comments in an email.
I
but
know.
do that. So, I would just say if there is anything substantive that you think of before then, just obviously be ready to discuss it next Friday, regardless of whether we get the MSBA decision or not.
Yep. No, that was my biggest like big picture comment, and the rest were little things. So, yep.
The other thing is I just wanted permission from the subcommittee to work directly with Greg on a message that could go out to the school community in his letter. And it doesn't have to be me, but it could be Katura. Obviously, I know you're very close to this too. Just someone to work directly with Greg and Keith to get something out as early as this week, advertising how substantial of a discussion and decision-making process may occur at that meeting, right? Obviously, there's a ton of public feedback that will come after that, but we all know that this presentation is going to be the first time that people are waking up to this reality of, the decisions that may be made, subject to obviously town meetings. So I just wanted really, instead of trying to bring language to a meeting and vote and all of that, I thought it was more important to get it out. So I'm happy to delegate it to Greg directly. I'm happy to select a member. I just wanted to make sure the committee was on the same page with more getting out there now is important so that people understand what's going to be discussed.
I think that's a great idea. I'm happy to work with Greg if you want me to, because I, kind of used to the school communication stuff, but you're welcome to do it if you want, but I'm happy to do it.
Go for it. All yours.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a great idea. Does that sound good, Greg?
Yeah, so shooting for Friday, a communication around the next school committee meeting and the work that's been done. Okay.
Yeah, and I can send you a link to the town website that will have the studies uploaded by then. So if someone wants to catch up, the IT director is trying to work on how to get all the videos over, but that's a story for another day. But we can at least link up the meeting minutes and all of that if someone really wants to do a deep dive. And then once you two have your verbiage, we can do a similar blast through the town channels. Obviously, because there is probably a non-school audience that's still very interested in this as well.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Any public comment? All right. Thank you, John, for joining us. Thank you, Kathy, for all the details and hard work. And I'm sure there will be questions to come. So I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Roll call vote. Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. Have a good day, everyone.